Wonderful. Okay, so we're back to getting started here. So Cady is an astronaut who has spent how many days? 180 days
It's
in
true.
space. 180 days in space, 2 shuttle missions, and then 6 months on the space station, the International Space Station. And one thing that I loved is that she went on her space station trip one day after her 50th birthday. So that, who said that after 50, nothing, you know, you're downhill from there. For her, it was really way up, way up. Welcome, Cady. And I have so many things to say about it, but welcome, Cady.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. And just, Jeannie and I have just somehow been like this ever since we met.
I know, we've met a long time ago, and it was I was always just like quite blown away by you, Cady, and all that you accomplished. It was so cool and so interesting. Cady is partly responsible for my oldest son going into aerospace engineering, I do believe. So we have that to thank her for. So Cady, she's also, you're an Air Force colonel, and you're now the Global Explorer in Residence at Arizona State University. You live, where you're famous for doing a space duet on your flute with Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull. And I love this, that you coached Sandra Bullock for the movie Gravity. That's pretty cool, I would say. So, before we get going, I want to show but the reason I know Cady is that my husband met her husband, and my husband's a photographer, and Rob took this picture of her and her son when I was writing a story. I'm going to share it. I was writing a story for Parenting Magazine about Cady. Can you see it there? And it was about a woman working outside, not just the home, but the Earth's atmosphere. So that's so there's Cady and her son Jamie, who's now 20 or 21. Is that correct? Okay. So Cady, I think you have some ways to start. You've done TED Talks, you advocate for women in STEM, and I'd love for you to kind of tell us a little bit about your story, and then we'll open it up for questions afterwards, because she's actually seen everything. Can I say that? That's probably the closest I can get to being true with anybody else, rather than anyone else. Okay, it's all yours.
Well, I'm so happy to be here. I do get to talk, some reasonable amount, or I have, since I retired from NASA, but to spend the evening with girlfriends, new and ones I've had for a while. I mean, I was really just so happy to do that. And in fact, Rob and Jeannie and my husband and I got together about, 2 weeks ago or so, and just got to say hello. We met because my husband, we commuted. I heard someone talking about their husband in retirement and being around the house. And Josh and I commuted for 26 years pretty much between Houston and Hartford. So a really long ways. And on one of those trips, my husband, who's a talker as well, met Jeannie's husband, who is a photographer, and I think did a lot of work for National Geographic as well as his own work. And they met, and I think I helped make sure that he got to take pictures of reasonable things, because the NASA public affairs people aren't always so good at that arranging. I mean, they were interviewing somebody on our crew, and we were doing exciting things in spacesuits, like Monday through Friday, except for Wednesday. And they gave Wednesday to Rob as the time to take pictures. So I think I rescued, and helped kind of scooch around so we could take good pictures for our friend. And anyway, so we met then, and then Jeannie is a freelance writer, and I think you wrote an article that involved me. And then we become friends, and I was talking about that we'd had a baby, and that several of the women astronauts had babies. And so that through public affairs, all the correct ways, the request went out, does anybody want to participate in this article about having babies? And, inside I'm thinking, and a National Geographic photographer take pictures of my baby?
Yes.
Yes. And so anyways, because I knew Rob would take the pictures. And I turned out to be the only one who either could or was interested in doing that. Several people were out of town and things like that. But So we've just been friends ever since, and I treasure those pictures, Jeannie. And actually in my talks, I tend to show pictures of my family, partly because, you know, we still have so many of those stereotypes, and it's really, I mean, things are changing and things are better, but definitely there's still, I'd say that all the girls that are younger than 50 still need our help, is what I think. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't get together and, you know, have our own meetings, which I'm very excited to be a part of. So I'm gonna, I thought I'd just whip through kind of quickly some pictures, because I think you can say a lot with pictures, but just to kind of make my world real to you. And I'll go kind of fast just because I really want to get to questions, because I'd love to hear what people, you know, I'd love to help answer any questions that you have, and there are no rude ones or bad ones or anything like that. And Jeannie's going to keep an eye on the chat, because I'm not coordinated enough to do that. Yeah. Okay, so let me see if I can grab my screen here. And I like to just, you know, make it a little bit real that I flew on the space shuttle twice, so 2 missions. I'm originally a scientist, a chemist, and I'm sort of a materials scientist, so those kinds of experiments. But we really go up there doing other people's experiments. And my first mission was a science mission to go ahead and understand how are we going to operate this space station laboratory? How are we going to do the experiments and have them work? And how are we going to keep the scientists from killing each other because they each want to have their experiment done right now? My second mission was really a simply amazing one, even though it was criminally short, only 5 days. And that was to launch the Chandra X-ray Observatory. There's a whole family of telescopes that NASA has, and they all look at different wavelengths of light. But Chandra looks at X-rays, which are like the really high energy, high temperature radiation that's given off when when stars explode, those are supernovas, when galaxies collide, when black holes are sucking things in, they are spewing things out, and those are X-rays. So this telescope was only supposed to work for 5 years, and now it's still working. So that was back in 1999. And literally everything we know about black holes and the newer gravitational waves and things like that come from this telescope, which is, I think, pretty cool. But the other reason this is a great slide is that the woman in the middle is Eileen Collins. She's the first woman commander of the space shuttle. And in this case, my mom was really happy to say that I was the other woman on the flight. Anyways, but it was, and for me, it was actually a really eye-opening experience, you know, because we're all different. I mean, of course, all the women astronauts that have the same hair color are pretty much the same. So we have the brunette group, we have the blonde group, you know, and so Eileen and I are clearly very different because she's blonde and I'm a brunette. So I had a lot to learn from her, but I'm laughing because people really do like get us mixed up. Not Eileen and I, but, you know, of similar hair color people. But Eileen had a different management style that was quieter, a little bit more consensus building, where she would say, what do people want to do? Here's the options. We'd all talk through it. We'd reach the conclusion she meant for us to reach, but she wouldn't just say, doing this, see you Monday. You know, and at the in the shuttle world or in the NASA world, it's not all military. I myself was military. The Air Force paid for my college at MIT, and I stayed in the Air Force the rest of the time until I retired. But only about, I don't know, 40%, 40% of the astronauts are military. So it's not as if it's like everyone. That's a little bit of a misconception. But it is the commanders tend to be military. They tend to be guys, and it tends to be a fairly, like, if they want everyone in the crew to wear this color, you know, boring color shirt on Tuesdays, then that is what you will do. Whereas Eileen was a little different. So I basically learned that, you know, there's different leadership styles and I could have my own, which was a really important lesson. And there's a little easier to see Eileen there in the lower left corner there. So that was a pretty thrilling mission to be on, and I really learned a lot from her. But I wanted to spend most of the time talking about the space station. This is the space station up in space, taken actually from, our crew took this picture, and that is when we backed away in one of our tiny little rescue ships, or the ships that we go up in, I'll show it to you in a minute, the Soyuz, we were actually undocking and coming home. And it's the only time we've ever taken photographs of the space shuttle, which is right here, if you look closely, and then the whole big space station. So it's a really special picture for me. This is me cutting my birthday cake on my 50th birthday. We're in quarantine. We're about to go to space. I mean, I was like, I have wet hair. I mean, we don't get to see anybody in quarantine, but there is like sort of windows and glass, and they can see us sometimes. And I was like, you know, getting ready, and my crewmate is like, Cady, come to breakfast. I go, I'm coming. He's like, Cady, you have to come now. And I come down, and there's like 50 people behind the glass. I call this the season of my birthday, because I actually celebrated my birthday really many times that year.
I love that. And I love that you, at some point you said that it was the best birthday present, going up in space, that made it hard for your husband to ever talk
better. Yeah, it's really true. But I did actually think that, and I kind of say it to people because they, you know, they're like, oh, 50. Well, you know, 50.
Yeah, I love it.
Anyways, and we go up in groups of 3. This is our crew. There's myself, Dmitry Kondratiev from Russia, and Paola Nespoli from Italy. And this is what a launch actually looks like. I like to show you this picture because you see the rocket, which is pretty amazing. And we're in that little part. This is our little craft inside there, but you also saw people taking pictures of it and interacting with it. And launches are kind of what they mean to you, I think. But this shows the inside of the spacecraft. And some of you may think like, oh, I wouldn't want to go to space because it's so cramped, so crowded. Well, the taxi ride up there is, but you're not in it very long, really. It's only 8.5 minutes up to space. It does take about 2 days to parallel park, depending on the mission that you're on. But it is, and we actually have an extra little smart car sized living room that we can go into during those 2 days. So it's really actually pretty amazing to get to do. But the space station itself, and you can see those sort of modules, those sort of like tube-like, almost like Airstream trailer things all hooked together. It's actually huge. So there is really no reason not to go to space. I mean, it's delightful, and there are no bugs, there are no snakes, and well, sometimes there are mice for experiments, okay? We're having several mice events in our farmhouse here this week. And yes, I did ask my husband to take care of them. Anyway, so there's our crew of 6. And, you know, if you just take a look there, we're all really different kinds of people. We all have different characteristics, and there is no luxury of saying, oh, these people will work out nicely together. It just doesn't work that way. It's, you know, every country has a certain turn when you can send somebody, the combination of what skills you need for spacewalking, for robotics, for experiments, that there's really literally no flexibility. And so I think they just hire professionals and expect you to figure it out. And to my left is a Russian crew member who's really one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And at the same time, it was really brand new territory for him to ever work with women as his equals, let alone actually have them be more experienced on the flight. And so we really got to learn a lot about each other, and very successful. I think we're a crew that really ended up doing just really well.
Was that Mark Kelly or his brother?
That's Scott Kelly. And so I was up there with Scott for about 4.5 months. And then Mark Kelly from Arizona he came up on the shuttle, and that was actually supposed to happen the same time. And then I was going to get to pick which one would get to stay.
Seriously?
And it was a joke, really, but this is us. And this is my favorite, even though you see my butt, this is my favorite scene in the whole, because it's about flying through space. There's our little robot. I mean, I did a lot of experiments, but I was also the chief repair officer, in that I, you know, would, and this got like a little bit of everything in this little 1.5-minute thing to kind of show you that we're all kind of different up there, and that it's a majestic, magnificent place to stay. And the view is simply astonishing. We all just loved to look out the window. It doesn't always look like this, like Aurora Borealis, Aurora Australis, but it is almost always really, really beautiful.
Wow.
And at night, those are all city lights. And if you see any little flashes, and then you see the green of the atmosphere, but the little flashes are all lightning. And then my heritage is Irish and some other things, but we pretty much only count the Irish, a quarter on each side, adding up to much more than a half. And that's just shows you the beautiful space station. So I really loved living up there. A tiny bit about what we do, in that this shows you why we do science up there, in that everything is floating around. And basically, because you take away gravity, which is this very large force, we can see other forces that are small. We can see what fluids really, really want to do. Who would have known, right? And if you happen to have a glass of wine with you, which I would recommend, then if you look at the edge of that glass of wine or water or milk or whatever, you're going to see that liquid kind of climbing up the side, but most of it's right in the glass. Well, without gravity to make it be there, we get to see what do they really want to do. And so scientifically, it's really fascinating information. In the world of combustion, the earth flame there is very different than the space flame on the right, which is rounded, and new, like those lighter gases are not rising. Like on the left, on Earth, they're rising, lighter gases, but on the right in space, lighter, heavier, doesn't matter, not going to rise, no new fuel coming in. And so measurements that here on Earth we have to take in like less than a second, we can take over 30 or 40 seconds up there. So we can learn a lot about combustion, about pollution, about how pollution is formed, about how to burn things more efficiently. And there's a spherical flame. So I think it's really something that makes me feel really good, is that we do experiments that are great for exploring space, but mostly they're experiments that are great for understanding how to live better on Earth. We're growing plants so that we have food on the way to Mars, not just Cheetos. And so, but the things that we learn, especially on this mission here, help us understand how to grow plants in places that it's hard to grow them in terms of food and food sustainability. And this is, I have this slide here, and I don't know if you can quite see on my thing, you know, all the pictures were hiding it, but if you can see my earrings there, I was a new person at learning how to fix things. And it turns out that you learn to use tools. It's not that hard. And then for all the fixing, there are directions. And you can, and there are YouTube videos, and even there are space YouTube videos for how to fix things. So all of us can fix things, but it is important to wear the right accessories. And I am wearing my nuts and bolts earrings here.
Oh, wow.
There we go, finding my little cursor there. We do a lot of experiments. I'll never be an Olympic athlete, but I really loved being able to do all the different experiments that an Olympic athlete might do. And some of the most significant ones have to do with osteoporosis. We lose bone up there about 10 times faster than a woman with osteoporosis. And so what she loses in a year, I would lose in a month. And so it really means that it happens more slowly to us, and it's easier to measure because we're up there with pretty clean kind of medical histories. So I'm going to go, we're not going to spend too much time on just regular operations. I was the head of robotics when I was up there. This is Paolo and I capturing that Japanese supply ship, only the second time it had ever been done. Spacewalking I did not get to do, but I'm very, very proud of having a portrait in that suit, which only happens when you are officially sanctioned and ready to go out the door on your mission with a spacesuit that is yours and gloves that are yours. And unfortunately, on our mission, there were no planned spacewalks, and nothing expensive outside broke that we were going to have to fix. So I did not get to use my suit, but I was really proud, especially because basically I'll go back back in the early days of the shuttle, we had spacesuits that were small, medium, large, and extra large. And then when they went to the space station program, they said, you know, we just can't afford, and it was true, we cannot afford money-wise to have all these different size spacesuits. And so we're not going to support the small or the extra large spacesuits, only the medium and the large. And that lasted for about a month and a half. And they then realized that the big guys didn't fit in the large, and they brought back the extra large. But essentially, at least more than a third of the women were knocked out of doing spacewalks because they were too small for the suit. And I am actually the smallest person to have a suit up there. And it was really mostly because, and I'm sure that there are women on this call that have done this kind of thing, you just show up to meetings that you weren't invited to. It wasn't that anybody thought, oh, we're not going to invite Cady. It just never occurred to them to do so. And they'd go, do you fit in that suit? And this was, after I'd been at NASA for like 20 years, right? And I'm like, yes, I have above average grades. Anyways, but there's still a lot of that has to happen, where when we do this practicing. This is my friend Anne McLean, and I love that she's got her kid there in the picture. She's got her kid's little elephant. That's pretty cool. But I love that we're allowed to have families, so to speak. I actually had to fight pretty hard with NASA to be able to show my family in a presentation, and now Anne is allowed to have this picture, which I think is so progress is kind of being made. And this year we had the all-woman spacewalk. There's a lot of misconceptions about it. We could talk about it in the question and answer. I mean, there were 3 people eligible to do spacewalks, and maybe 4 on the space station at the time. 2 of them were women. I mean, the odds are that 2 of them are going to go out the door together. No one said, let's have one where it's all women. We have a bunch of women that are really qualified in the suit, and more spacewalks for women. And Kate Rubins is on her way up to the space station. She's done several spacewalks. She's going up for the 2nd time. And so you'll see her up there, hopefully doing spacewalks if they're required. And I just wanted to put a plug in for Valentina Tereshkova, who is the first woman astronaut, and she's Russian. And the help that I've gotten from her, from other women that came before me, especially when they eliminated those small spacesuits, basically the women who had done spacewalks on the shuttle said, listen, all of you that are smaller, we are going to help you figure this out and optimize. And a lot of different advice over the course of my career, which I treasure. And I treasured this. This was really fun to get to meet her before my launch in Russia. And we basically I just wanted to have coffee with her. And it was arranged, and then it became a big press conference kind of thing. And then she basically just shooed everybody out of the room and shut the door and said, now we'll have tea and we'll talk. And we had a great time. Anyways, and the greatest of news is that for the new program, which is going back to the moon, then the Artemis program, they are designing suits that fit all the people that they have in the astronaut corps, and they are really cognizant of some of the things that don't fit the women, and trying to make sure that basically we make equipment that works for everyone. I mean, I heard a phrase just today where if you have a flower that is a beautiful flower and it grows in a lot of places and it seems like it's a really great flower, but in one place it doesn't grow, do you try to figure out another flower there? No, you change the environment. So just because you really need to make sure that everyone has the equipment that they can show who they are and what they can do, and not just, basically if I could show that I was good enough, I would be added to the team. Nobody should have to work that hard, really. Anyways, so and lots of imaginative ideas about spacesuits. And this is my friend, an MIT professor named Deva Newman, and her dad wanted a guy kid. And so he said, well, whoever it is, they're going to be named Dave. And so Dave is Deva. And she's an MIT professor, designs spacesuits, and understands the value of public relations, of gathering a team, whether the team is who wants to work on this spacesuit with me, or the team is, the world of young women and little girls, that when they see this picture, they really just think, oh, wow, that's a pretty cool spacesuit. Maybe that could be me. And I will say not so much with that big suit that we're used to seeing. So I think that the more we can get images of women and girls actually doing things in these worlds that have been traditionally male, I think the sooner that we change that world. And speaking of which, and I'll probably just talk for about 5 more minutes. Jeannie, does that work?
That's good. That's fine. Yep.
Okay. I like to show this slide because we've been talking about sort of feeling different, and I actually talk about this not just with you because it's a group of women, but I talk about it in many of my talks because I think that basically success comes only through collaboration. And collaboration for things that are, when you really have challenging problems, you need the whole team, and you need everything that everyone brings on the team, and you need to see them. And this is a picture from the movie Hidden Figures. It's Catherine Coleman Johnson, that's her maiden name. And she's a mathematician with a doctorate who was responsible for the equations of how to get people from the Earth out to space, maybe to the moon, and back for Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and the space shuttle. She just died at the age of 102, about, I don't know, within this year. Sharp as a tack until her very last day is what I understand. And so the movie's called Hidden Figures, but she is a woman of color wearing a dress of color in a sea of white guys with white shirts and skinny black ties. And yes, it's still pretty much a habit, a way that they dress at NASA, some of the people in mission control. And so it's impossible to miss her, but we missed her. And my sort of thing for you to think about is that in this picture, you know, I'm the one that sticks out in this picture because I'm wearing a different color outfit, so to speak. You see both Kelly brothers, Mark Kelly, who's running for senator, and Scott Kelly, who spent a year up in space. They're both in this picture. They're twins. And one of them looked at the other and said, yeah, I didn't tell her, because they'd decided on a wardrobe thing and just didn't let me know. So I did my best in the 20 minutes that I had before we left for the White House. Anyways, but in this picture, I think I mean, there's people who obviously stick out, and yet, like me and my different color, maybe President Obama in color in a different way, but everyone in this picture, I think, brings something to the team that they don't think other people see or appreciate or really understand. This is what they bring. And so as a space crew, we can't afford to miss those things in each other. And so I wanted to share some of the ways that we do that we help sort of lower these barriers to really getting the most out of a team. This is Paolo, our Italian. You can tell he's pretty easy to connect with. And I think connection is really the key. And in all the Zoom conferences that we do, I think these lessons are multiplied times, you know, several hundred times, where you have to work harder to connect with people on Zoom than in, you know, when you're able to actually sort of interact with them and see them and feel them. But with Paolo, it was pretty easy. Oh, sorry, that's not supposed to be there. Do you see the little tiger around the robot's neck? That tiger is Hobbes. My son liked Calvin and Hobbes, and it was one of the ways I had of bringing him with me. In this picture, Scott and I are pretty different. We have different vocabularies. We have different ways of expressing ourselves or not expressing ourselves. And I tell people that in this picture, the robot is the one on the left. And Scott knows that I say that. But Scott and I mean, I don't think either one of us, we are very different, expected to really find so many things in common. But partly the mission that we're up there for is the thing that allows you to really, you know, just lower those barriers and volunteer what you need help with, and also accept the help that either you know you need or someone tells you that you need. And for being a person of very few words, not all of them with a lot of letters or polite, Scott was the king of non-judgmental feedback on that space station, which I very much appreciated. And I had to learn that, you know, this guy was there too. You know, the guy who's just found the best and biggest bungee cord up on the space station that we can use as a slingshot. And I love this picture because it shows Al Drew there in the spacesuit, and Al and I had really worked so very hard to be ready for some operations that we knew would be difficult when he came up to the space station. And then when he was there, they were indeed really, we just had to sort of be everything. I know it sounds terrible, but we be everything we could be to get the job done that day. And that's why this is really one of my favorite photographs. Is that I think it just shows like what a crew feels like when they know they just dug way down and really did what they could and had a successful day. Nicole, my friend who's the first person to capture a supply ship with the robotic arm. I am the second person to capture something with the robotic arm. Our friend Sunny Williams was supposed to be the third person. Now you can see this progression of names. There's Nicole, there's Cady, there's Sunny. Maybe only girls can capture supply ships with the robotic arm. I mean, you know, I'm just trying to sort of like make sense of what's there. But our friend Donald Pettit was the third person after all. And it turns out boys can do it too. But when, you know, Nicole and I have kids the same age. And so we know that it, you know, between the hours of probably 5 and 8, we're not going to email, we're not going to text, we're not going to, because we're getting our kids dinner and bed and all those kinds of things. And that, you know, after that, maybe we'll pick up with some things that we need to talk about. We trained together. I was her backup. So I think it's just pretty neat to see women in space, and I wanted to share some of these photos. This is in the front, in the blue is Pam Melroy, second woman commander of the space shuttle, and in the middle there is Peggy Whitson, who is was the commander of the space station. So 2 women commanders of the 2 vehicles that were up there. And something I'll share is that when we come home from missions, the trainers, the people who get us ready, they will have all these they'll have all these sort of cartoons in the hallway. And there was this one, and Peggy is supreme. I mean, Pam is too, but she was on the shuttle there for a little while. I mean, Peggy was a force of nature living on the space station 3 times. I mean, she's just, I mean, I am certainly not that efficient. I mean, she's really just amazing. And so there was a kind of weird looking picture of Superman and in the hallway of, you know, all these things honoring the crew as they come home. And I looked at this, and the caption is, Superman wears Peggy Whitson pajamas, which I thought was anyways. You saw some music, and I just have some things to say about perspective of seeing things from far away and learning to see things differently. And, you know, sometimes I'm talking to the people that I wish could learn to see things differently. And sometimes I'm talking to people who wish that people could see them differently. And I think it all comes down to, for both of us, or, all, you know, both camps, is learning to see things from a different perspective. When I have a view like this of Cape Cod, I feel like I'm up and looking down. I must be so high to see all that. And so I feel like I'm looking out the window like this. But really, if I can see all that, I must be actually upside down looking at the earth, if you think about it. So if you look at these pictures, I mean, I'm sort of making a little, you know, just a funny kind of space joke about, for us, you know, there's no upside down or right side up, but we are used to looking at things one way. And if you walk into a meeting or a Zoom session or your kitchen, and you sort of have the same perspective and the same attitude and look at things the same way, you're going to have the same result. And so in this picture, I think you can see me, but usually, because I have the big hair, but usually we don't see the people that are sort of in a place we don't really expect, like upside down. But here you can see me a little more easily. Same thing here. You see Naoko from Japan and Dottie from Seattle, but not up top. You don't really see Stephanie and Tracy until we show them in a way that it's really a little more like we're used to looking at them. So I think changing your perspective, making those connections, and family just turns out to be the third and last thing I'll talk about real quick is I think that that's one of the things that can bring some very different people from different places with different work experiences together as a team. This is my husband, Josh, and our son, Jamie, when he was 10, actually now almost 11, or that was 11 because we'd just come home. But Josh sent me this picture of Jamie standing on my little spot in Russia right after I launched, and our bus pulled away, and there's Jamie getting his picture taken in his little Russian hat. And this is when we first got up to space, and he's talking to his mom up on the space station. And then this is home. He's got his trusty cat that he loved. And even though I left him with a very nice husband, it was nice to also leave him with our Maine Coon cat, who is much like a dog as you could imagine, and really goes with him everywhere. And so it was just kind of nice that even though he didn't have his mom right there, that he would have, and couldn't really call her, that he would have his cat. And now he's grown up. He's a sophomore in college, being a really great but sort of lonely, I think, COVID citizen in Washington, D.C., going to American University, living by himself, trying to stay away from those crowded apartments and things like that. I really think that's really commendable. And this is him with the same cat, this big cat. Anyways, and then I have an artist husband who I think he's the one left holding the fort, and it was simply wonderful to do that for me. And to just know, I mean, I just knew that everything would be as fine as a mom knows it can be without her. I'll put it that way. And he's a glass artist. He makes wonderful things. He made planets and art, space art, long before we ever met. I very much loved it. And I just got very expensive, so I had to get married, really, pretty much. But I think that family aspect of things is what takes a picture like this of, 6 people who are planning to work together and turns it into a picture like this. And I think with that, I'm just going to stop and maybe stop the screen, the sharing, and take questions.
Yes, because we've got lots of questions.
Cool. Oh my goodness, it's good. Okay.
Questions. And I will call on Colette first. Colette, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi. I actually have a young friend who is 24 and very involved in getting towards the space program. So my question was about whether the women who are already in the program are supportive of each other, or is it more of a competitive environment? And are they supportive of those women young women who are trying to come up in the field?
I find them, within the astronaut corps and the other women at NASA, there's a hashtag women at NASA that I love to follow, where it's just, they celebrate, they celebrate the things that women are doing, not just astronauts. I found it to be incredibly supportive, really. And it's still that way, where there's just something special. And in fact, I just came from a meeting right before this, where there's a whole bunch of us that are retired. It's the first time to have so many retired women astronauts. And we often, get asked to do talks and things like that. And one of the people is really good at organizing, and that's not me. And she is organizing a group called Astrofemina, which any of us can be members of, and actually includes some other women at NASA. And it's sort of expanding, but it's all about trying to make sure that girls really around the world understand that, science, technology, engineering, A for art, I like to put that in there for STEAM, and M for math, that those things can be theirs anytime that they want. And I do just think that, I think there's a lot of messages that they get that this is not you. And some of a lot of it's not on purpose. I mean, they did a show for National Geographic where it was live from the space station, but the crew that they happened to be given, and you really can't say, no, not right now. I mean, NASA's like, okay, if you want to do that, it's now. Happened to be like, 6 guys up there. And so we worked really hard to make sure that some of the B-roll, some of the other scenes that they would show, and that Mission Control had the voices of women. And, and so because to me, it was like almost like an emergency. I mean, here's this show. It's going to be out there. It's going to be loud. And 9-year-old girls are going to watch this show, see only guys, and not even know they're getting this message that says, yeah, by the way, yeah, not really, not so much you.
Yeah. So let's see that Leanne Parsons, do you want to unmute yourself? You have a question? You have a couple, but we'll try to go through them fast.
Okay, what's the most sexist question you've ever been asked around your career?
There are so many to choose from, really.
I thought that might be the case.
I don't know. I think, the ones that are really blatant, actually, our guys, I say guys, but our guys, there was a few older guys that sort of didn't understand, you're not really allowed to say that. Do you know what I mean? I did have someone say at one point, I had a commuting marriage, and I commuted back and forth. And, it's typical of, I'm sure, what all of you have experienced, where, when I'm down there and I'm basically a single parent, as were some of the other women, I am not going to be the one that has to leave because they haven't figured out somebody to pick up their kid at daycare unless it's an emergency, right? Mm-hmm. And it would be actually the guys that would be like, hey, sorry, I've got the kids. Or, and in fact, the woman who is the Director General of Canada, Julie Payette, she and I was in charge of all the Capcoms, the people who speak in mission control. And people sign up for shifts. And I would get from the guys things like, oh, single dad this week, no Capcom duties. Julie and I, both single parents, geographically single, right? Just going, what are we, you know? Anyway, so, but I think it's not the really like the wildly sexist questions that are bad. I think there's sort of, what is it, the death by 1,000 paper clips? And there's just all these kind of little things, and especially the question, and the reason I show my family of, you know, well, did you mind leaving your kid on the earth? You know, didn't you mind leaving your family? Well, of course I did. And the thing is, the guys mind as well. And I learned a lot of my coping skills from some of our guys, but it's those kind of questions that I think are sort of subliminal and worse.
And you did say when we were talking earlier that there are skills or leadership skills or team working skills that women are particularly suited to. Or I think you said something about that, but they're underappreciated. Is that something you can tell us about?
Well, there's multitasking. I mean, I don't mean to be stereotypical, right? But there is multitasking. It's a really big multitasking environment up there.
Right.
And even, you know, to be like the head of mission control and be dealing with all the different, you know, electrical power, what do you have to say? You know, propulsion, what do you have to say? That kind of multitasking women are actually, you know, stereotypically quite great at, but also understanding kind of the health of the team in a very deep way, how people are, what they need, what they can't quite tell you that they need. I find stereotypically there's that. You know, it's leadership that I like, and you know, and I think a lot about. I'm somebody who leads from behind. I think about it and think about changing it, and then I forget because it's just kind of my natural way. But we did actually quite an interesting exercise, Paolo and Dimitri and I, where with a national outdoor leadership team person, partly because Dimitri really had never had worked with women. And there were some issues that we needed to address. And he said, the national outdoor leadership guy said, well, I've just been listening to all of you getting ready for your emergency training exercise tomorrow. And, you know, Dimitri asked 3 questions as you were reading through and deciding what your plan was. And Paolo asked about 6 and Cady asked 13. And it made me realize that my way of saying, you know, was like, hey, have we thought about this? Hey, have we counted that? You know, and I'm really saying, we didn't count this, you know, and I needed to realize that I needed to give my inputs differently if I expected them to be listened to or heard.
That's a really good point about how we're kind of worming our way through, you know, trying to get our point in and not hurt feelings and not, but that's partly not, it's not your fault, but it's just the way that we've learned how to come up, I would think. And I like that you were talking about Eileen Collins, her leadership style, but you said she kind of asked questions, but did you meet any women leaders in NASA who were more, you know, direct, like you, that more like maybe you would hope to be? You
know, definitely. There's a woman named Ellen Ochoa who just was always very, very quiet, but just has this kind of way of figuring out what's big and what's small. I tend to be somebody who sort of sees everything. I mean, I think I'm very good with perspective as well, but she just was this very measured, calm, you know, leader, which I really appreciated. And in fact, when I was, she ended up being in charge of space station construction at a certain point, and she ended up in her last position at NASA that she just left about a year ago. She was the director of the Johnson Space Center.
Wow.
Which is really awesome. And she was my boss as the lead Capcom or capsule communicator right when I had Jamie, and we had some trouble with him and he needed some surgery. And I was, you know, saying, okay, listen, I'm going to be out a little bit longer, but then I'll be back. And she said, you know, Cady, we are going to be launching space station missions for a really long time, and you will always be needed here. But, you know, you just stay as long as you need to, because Jamie will only be, you know, 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months old once. And it then gave me, when I was in charge of people, you know, there are people that would say, they wouldn't say it, but you'd know that if they saw you at your desk, they thought you were working. And if they didn't, they didn't. Whereas somebody who had a family that was remote and then had a family, it was harder to be there sometimes. And I just made it really clear to people that, you know, wherever you do your work, I don't care. If you're in the best place to do your work, that's great. You know, I just need to know where you are.
Right.
And I'm never going to judge when I don't see you at a desk. Yeah. So I think there is some of that passing down of leadership.
Mary Hasselbauer, you had a question. You want to unmute yourself? There you are.
Hi, I'm really fond of science fiction. I read and write it, and I have a story I'm working on, and I have a question about being older in space. Is it how did it feel different on your last trip versus the first ones?
I think first of all, without this gravity thing, I mean, gravity really sucks. Okay, and one of the shuttle crews came up, and one of the guys, it was kind of rude, but we're all just friends, and he goes, "Did Cady look this good on the ground?" No. And then somebody else goes, "No, not really."
But Cady, every picture of your hair is just gorgeous. It's like,
well, it's the same hair actually. It's just gravity makes it straight, right? But a little keratin these days. But actually, we all have very puffy faces up there, and you can see almost like a little bit puffy. But it really does. I mean, and plus, I mean, all of these things that inch their way down to the floor, they're all pretty marvelous in space. I'm just going to say, okay. But I think Mary, you were actually asking a more serious question. And it is a very, I mean, without gravity, like, how down here when you work out, if you worked out really hard, a certain body part on Monday, you'd probably wait till Wednesday to work that part out again, to give it some recovery time. But because we literally don't walk around and we don't use energy to just sort of be, we can actually work out hard really every single day, which I found to be an interesting mental challenge. I kind of wanted that break, really. And Mary, I was going to tell you that I'm a big science fiction fan as well, although not a knowledgeable one, but I like it, and I like science fantasy. There's an author named Mary Robinette Kowal. I don't know if you know that name.
Oh, yes. I'm a fan.
And so this woman reached out and said, has anybody, can anybody help me with space terminology? And she's now won a Hugo and a Nobel for this Lady Astronaut series. And it's basically about in the 50s, something happens to the Earth and they realize they have to leave the Earth, and they have to do it with Apollo technology. And the people that are able to make this solution come together happen to be a mix of men and women and races and all sorts of things. And so it's like Hidden Figures, but in fiction, and really very thought provoking. But one of the things that she talks about is that so I ended up, a friend of mine put me together with her, and I helped her, and another astronaut did as well. And she talked to him about spacewalking and what that was like practicing. And then she wrote her scene that had spacewalking practice in it. And then she talked to me and she said, now I have to completely rewrite that scene, because I can tell that for my woman character, it's probably very, very different experience. But the second part of that lesson, she just told me the other night, I spoke at a Comic-Con, was that she ended up speaking about that to another astronaut who I don't know actually who it is. And they said, well, it's a good thing that things aren't like that anymore, like in your book. And she said, well, they absolutely are like that in that book. And the person that told me that story is someone that you know and that you talk to. And he was like, that goes on now?
Wow.
That was pretty interesting to me.
Yes. So, I mean, would you say that like this science and technology, this kind of field, is it one of the hardest, do you think, for women to be accepted? I mean, I know you don't have much to compare it to, but do you think there's just more of a barrier to accepting women?
I think it's just that there are not many, and then when there's not many, there's many judgments made. And I will always say that we'll really have made it when you could be a mediocre woman engineer.
Mm.
I don't actually think, you can be considered that, because if you're a mediocre kind of just average woman engineer, I don't think you'll be considered a very good engineer, whereas a guy would be considered really just fine, right?
Right.
And I think that, it's hard for people to see people different than themselves. And there's something actually particular in the astronaut world where it's such an important mission. And when the chief astronaut or whoever is picking new crews, that you have to pick the best crew possible. And you have to know in your heart of heart that you did that. And I think that when you think that and do that, it's somebody that looks and feels like you. And I think that unexpected can be visible, which is not a bad thing. I'm unexpected, I would say. And at the same time, I think you have more to prove. I think you have to be careful about always showing up with your credentials. And I think that's true in all these fields where there's not many girls. And that's why I really like this popular media approach. If you look up Super Bowl ad for Olay, you're going to see two actresses, Busy Phillips and somebody else very famous, and my friend Nicole is in that ad, and it's basically about a bunch of women on their way to space. And I mean, it's really fun. It's goofy. It's kind of silly, but you can contrast that with but there's a whole bunch of girls that are going to think, oh, this could be me. And you can contrast that with the year before, there was a Super Bowl ad that had the Kelly brothers in it, and how much more money would it have taken or whatever to have at least a woman or a person of color or both, let alone have them speak?
Right.
You know, where here when so many people are going to see something like that, to not use that opportunity to make the changes that we're talking about, I think is almost criminal. But it's really this, I think that each one of us has different ways of affecting those networks, of writing books where women can see themselves.
Right.
I'm a yacker. I'm happy to stay longer.
Thank you so much.
There's Brian's. I'm going to read your question, Brian, because he said he didn't want to take away from the female voice, but he has a very important point. He said, your story about spacesuit meetings is intriguing to me. In my own field, I noticed that being a man in the room, dominance of conversation and opinion falls to me. What are some communication tactics learned along the way so everyone, any gender and other elements of diversity, feel heard? That's a good question, Brian, and I'm glad you're aware. Seem very self-aware.
Thank you so much. I think equity and inclusion is everybody's responsibility.
Yes, that's a good point.
I do as well, and certainly I've learned. So I mean, it's not like guys are bad. I mean, I love the guys that I work with, and I really have great relationships. And one of the guys that I was up there with, we look at each other. I go, I miss brushing my teeth with you. It's just, they're really wonderful people, but it's, I don't know, it's very human. I think, some systems where you just say, we're going to take turns and everybody's going to speak. Maybe you have to threaten to turn the microphone off, as we've learned recently this week, right? But seriously, there's a woman who runs the School of Earth and Space Exploration at Arizona State University. And as the head of that school, she had a rule at faculty meetings, was that if you wanted to say something, anyone could say something, but you couldn't speak again until everyone that had something to say had spoken. And so it encouraged you to be brief and to realize that everyone is going to get a turn. And and it made those faculty meetings were like an hour, and then the faculty meetings were not going to go longer. So that was another technique. I'd have to think of more, but the fact that you're even asking about it, Brian, and I think that bringing it up in a group and saying, I'd like to make sure we hear from everybody, or how, I don't know. I think bringing it up will make people then bring the ideas that might work for them.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it, Dr. Coleman.
And Shaziana, I hope I'm saying that right. You had several questions. Let's see if we can which one's most important to you? Shaziana, if you want to unmute yourself.
Sure. So hopefully they're just quick questions, and two of them kind of follow within each other.
Okay.
The first one is, how do you feel about the current demographics-based firsts, i.e. like first woman to go to the moon, first woman, all women spacewalk, first Black woman? Because sometimes I find they get a little tiring. But obviously they have like advantageous effects, like someone gets to see representation. So I was wondering your opinion on that. But then through all of the discriminatory or sexist type of experiences you've had, what are some moments that you felt empowered? What are moments that you felt really good about doing what you're doing and stuff, even through those experiences? And the last question I had is, when you were talking about being able to see the world differently from another perspective, and sometimes people can't see it that way, do you have any advice for being able to translate seeing the world differently, maybe in terms of outreach or how to do so? So those are my questions.
Okay. You know, the first, and, you know, like right now we're saying, you know, for the Artemis mission, which is going to the moon, and they're saying they're going to go back to the moon. And I really think this is happening now. I mean, going to the moon, going to Mars, these are not 4-year presidential cycle operations. You know, these are 30-year visions. And actually the really noble people at NASA who, I mean, they have a vision, they're working on it. There's all these different things that have to happen. We have things we can learn from going to the moon. We have things to learn on that space station. We have things to learn in deep space. So even when the administration chooses one of those paths and says, this is what we're doing, we're still actually getting there. But I think Artemis, the mission to the moon, will happen. And what they say is that it's going to be the first woman and the next man landing on the moon or walking on the moon. First of all, we better make a spacesuit that fits them, right? I don't really see a reason to, I mean, I'm not sure why it's preordained that, I think it's good to make sure that there's one woman. I mean, the fact that there are so many women astronauts that are completely qualified doesn't make me think, oh, someone's going to do it just because they want the first woman. But why we think it's going to be a guy as the second person, I wonder why that is like preordained, right? Anyways, you know, that first stuff and celebrating and they're complicated questions. I've been really excited about this increased awareness. And, you know, in terms of Black Lives Matter, in terms of racial justice, and I'm still just trying to learn. And I think the more questions you ask of others, I mean, these are hard conversations. I will say that to have a conversation with, you know, one of the other women astronauts who's Black and say, well, so how is it for you? It must be different. I mean, that's a hard conversation because I'm assuming it is different when it's not supposed to be different, but it's got to be different. And these are very human, hard conversations to have. But like, I appreciated Brian's question. I appreciate hard questions. And I think there's a quote, and I don't know who said it. It says, there's no way to take the danger out of human relationships, but asking those questions and getting the real work done, I think is really important. And, you know, whatever the labels are, I mean, somebody has to be first, but realize there's a lot of people in back of them that are really wonderful. And yet when you are the first, you know, you've got some, you know, you are able to accomplish a lot, I think. And I think you asked when I felt like I'd done well or whatever.
Most empowered.
Empowerment.
Empowered. I think really, in a way, coming home, it did a lot of things. Some of the things you see in my slides are just things that I thought I would do up there, and they weren't really celebrated up there. Not that they were forbidden. It was more, I knew I had different ideas, and I'm glad to have come home and realized that I've actually changed everyone's ways of having experiences up there, and that other people then can go along that path and be real people and film that and send their pictures out and have pictures of their family. And so I'm glad to have paved some of that way. And I'm actually quite proud of the things that I've done in the spacesuit, because it is better. And yet there's still a ways to go, but I'm very proud of having done that. It's not everybody's way, the way I did it, showing up cheerfully, but I was proud of it.
I'm going to just quickly jump because I know we're running out of time, and I want to make sure.
I'm good for a bit, Cady, but you guys probably have a limit of what you're allowed to do.
No, but I want to respect that people have other, you know, I don't want to.
Yeah, no offense taken at signing off. We understand.
And Patricia, you had a question. I think you had a question about the actual physical experience.
Yeah. Hi, Cady. I'm so enamored with you. I desperately wanted to go into space. I even took one of those half-day programs at Cape Canaveral.
Cool.
I mean, I was terrified. I sat in the replica of the Mercury and I couldn't breathe. So I knew I was never going to be able to do that. And the astronaut we interviewed was Jim McBride. And I asked him, for those of you who don't know, he piloted Sally Ride's first endeavor into space. And so I'm just getting the chills thinking about it. Two things, the physical training. Oh, I even was an extra in the movie Apollo 13. I played one of the astronauts' wives.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, that was kind of fun. That was many, many years ago. That was 20 some odd years ago. But tell me two things. One, the training, that probably would take a whole nother afternoon for you to even get into that. But what did it feel like physically from takeoff to breaking the atmosphere if that's a couple of minutes, your body must go through some extraordinary transformation.
It's, you know, it's actually like, it's like an, you're on your back, you know, so you're on your back and the force is like directly this way. And so we all say that it's like having a gorilla on your chest, but of course none of us really know what that feels like. And it's only like that for a few of the minutes. There's a lot of shaking, rattling, and rolling, and it's a pretty violent experience. Landing is actually a pretty violent experience as well. But it's not, I mean, I think in general, you're going to do your job better if you're in good shape. For me, with the spacewalking, it was just part of my confidence to be in the best shape that I possibly could. And so that just gave me one more thing I didn't have to worry about, because the actual task with small hands and things like that was very hard. And so, it's over pretty fast, really. I don't know. It's not so terrible. I mean, it's interesting. And plus, up there, we actually exercise about an hour a day, an hour and a half a day, an hour of cardio, an hour of weightlifting, which is a machine that it has resistance, and it's really cleverly made that it has really good angles and torques and ways that it stresses your muscles. Anyway, so we do that exercise, and we also do cardio for half an hour a day. And I came home in the best shape of my entire life from that space station flight. And I'll just give this advice, never buy clothes when you first get home from space, because I'll never be that size again.
Oh, we'll remember that.
So if you go.
Yeah. Thank you, Cady. That's so nice.
Cady, about osteoporosis, is that because we're a magazine for women in this age group, is that something that your body compensated for? Are you okay now, or was that bone loss a permanent?
Well, we'll see. In general, I mean, I came home with the same amount of bone that I left with. And because when you do a bone scan, you're really kind of going, how much bone is here, right? But what we think is the theory is that you're losing bone. If your bone is like a pipe, you're losing bone out of the sort of meaty middle, that trabecular bone. But it's through the exercise, it's kind of plating on the outside and building up the density on the outside. So we might be like skyscrapers that don't have completely, constructed middles. We'll have to see what the structural implications are of that. And I have a physical every year, courtesy of your tax dollars, except this year I probably will not go down to Houston. I'll have it somewhere else. But we're living, breathing lab rats, so we'll see. But I actually took an osteoporosis drug, a bisphosphonate drug that many people take, but it was experimental for space. And so we're able to look, because it happens so fast, we're able to look at the effects of diet, the effects of salt, of vitamin D. These are some of the experiments. The effects of exercise. Exercise really seems to be the key player for staying strong for us as women.
Yeah, so that's good to know. That's good to know, to remember to keep active. Maria has a really good question. You want to unmute yourself, Maria Carrillo?
Yes, I want to know how you are going to celebrate your 60th after having, that 50th. What's going to top it?
Well,
we were just talking about it because we both turned this year, like 4 days apart. So we were sort of talking about.
We're deciding, and plus, I do think of it as the season of my birthday.
Yes.
So there'll be several occurrences. Hard to say. It's fun. It's a funny year for these things. And in some ways, it kind of simplifies life. I think I don't have to come up with a big 60th birthday plan.
I just had my 50th during quarantine, so I'm still 49 till next year.
Okay.
I like it.
It doesn't count.
Maria, that's a really good idea.
This one didn't count. It's a do-over.
So maybe we don't have to have it count either, Jeannie.
Okay. We'll just put it out there over years.
There we go.
I still have so many questions. We could talk a lot. I wanted to talk about SpaceX and, the privatization of space, but we'll not go there because that's too much. But I know that they're looking for people to go into space, like to go to Mars. Would you ever go back into?
Oh, I would go in a minute.
Okay.
I would go in a minute. I would. You know, and I think I would love to just tell real quick kind of what that whole playing board looks like. And it's not very long, but it's just that, so we've always just we had NASA, and you think, oh, that's the way to go to space. But now we have these commercial companies like SpaceX, like Blue Origin, like Virgin Galactic, and they all kind of have different missions. And some people worry like, oh, a company, they're gonna like trash human life and be really dangerous and not care. But it's a really great partnership. And this is not just the party line, but my own observations is that, you know, I would say to the people, my team at NASA, I would go, you know, those people at SpaceX, sometimes they make a decision and they don't even have a meeting. I mean, do you know how many meetings we had at NASA, right? So they do things different. It's a very different culture, but then ultimately you're doing things together. And so, you know, I think at NASA, we're sort of inspired by the snappiness of saying, okay, so why don't we just like try that? You know, and yet the big thing is that all these companies can take bigger risks with hardware, with pieces of metal and whatever, sending them up to space, having a rocket launch, having it fail, and going, well, I guess we learned something there. But if the government does that, I mean, there's investigations, there's reports, all those kinds of things. And so by them taking those steps with hardware and leaping ahead, they bring us with them. So these partners, plus I think that, you know, space belongs to all of us, and companies like Blue Origin that really think that people should get to go to space, and companies like Virgin Galactic, Richard Branson's company, I just, you know, used to think that he must just like a daredevil kind of thing, but this is a man who really has a heart for our planet and sustainability, and he is bringing people of means and resources up to space, I think, with the idea that if they get to see our planet from above, they're going to realize that we have work to do and that their means and resources are important. And when they get back down, he's got a plan for them. So don't judge them too quickly, these companies, and think, you know, what does this mean? Even the people who have given the Russians millions of dollars to go and fly in space come home and usually do really important work with that perspective that they gain. So I think it's a really exciting time. And there is also, you know, in terms of making going to Mars real, there are people who are saying, okay, we're going to form a team for Mars and we're going to pick the top 100 people that apply. And the Mars 100, they're not probably going to go, all of them, or even many of them. And they know that, but they know that actually having that momentum, that sort of public face of other people getting to see their faces and realize that, you know, the team that goes to Mars could look like me. That's the purpose. And they're really, in a way, doing a very big public service to make sure that people know that going to Mars is real and everyone should get ready.
Right. Well, the next question I have for you is probably we'll wind it up. And I apologize to anyone who hasn't gotten questions to ask questions. But what's happening with you right now? What are you doing going forward? What's important to you right now in your work?
Well, a lot of the things that we're talking about are important to me in terms of, you know, having had this privilege of going to space. I'm somebody that people will answer my email most of the time, right? And so, you know, being able to be a voice of influence, a voice that helps them do more with their resources. I do a lot of consulting and do some for, you know, kind of movie show kind of stuff. I actually really like that part because I feel like it's gonna make this difference. So I do some of that kind of consulting. I'm doing speaking. You know, I'm trying to do things that I think will empower women and minorities to realize that they have just as much a place in all these endeavors as anyone, and probably more so. Mm-hmm. And so I'm doing that kind of speaking. I'm part of Arizona State University, which if you've not looked at it, it's really an interesting place. I don't actually live there, even though I'm the artist or the explorer in residence. But I did spend a bunch of time there, and they are a place that really believes that education is for everyone. And they are just breaking all those traditional rules of education, of how people get it and what it means. And I really love what they're doing for minorities in terms of getting education. And even, I mean, they have these kind of like wild thoughts like, okay, people who work at Starbucks or work at Uber clearly want to have a flexible schedule. Well, probably they want to have a flexible education schedule too. And so they have a deal with Uber and Starbucks that anyone who works at Uber and Starbucks for like 6 months can have a free online 4-year degree from Arizona State University.
Wow.
So I like the fact that they are, you know, plowing down these rules. And as a person who is visible and has a voice, I've been interested in using that presence to help them. And it's really been very satisfying.
And is there anything, what can we be doing to help young, you know, women in these fields? I mean, is there things that we can be doing? Just
I don't have a terrific answer for that, except that I think all of us have a different sort of viewpoint, a different perch, a different place where we see ways. And you can't do work all the time. You can't always be like, you know, but when you can, when you have the bandwidth, which I think is less now during COVID, COVID's been hard. And I'm, you know, humbled to think that really it used to be nobody understood what it meant to, what it felt like to sort of be at a distance and not be able to be with the people that you wanted. And yet actually now everyone really understands how that feels. And I think for me, keeping it, realizing that the mission and really focusing on why I'm up there, or why are we staying home, or why are we not, you know, seeing people that we might be endangered, you know, we might be a danger to, or vice versa, you know, that our mission is to keep each other safe. And so, you know, with the bandwidth that you have, looking and seeing what are the avenues you have. And it might just be, you know, not saying to the little girl that's dressed so cute that you love her outfit. It's really hard for me. It's really hard not to tell them that. I try so hard to think of something else to say to them about the way except about the way they look. I mean, I think there's some little things like that. And to look, you know, especially for the quiet ones that don't somehow have a family life or a community where they actually, you know, really, I mean, some have no idea that they could be me, they could be you. And trying to see them and ask people what they need. You know, we were talking about Black Lives Matter. Ask people what you can learn, ask people how you can help, because I think it's a good time for listening.
And one other question, because I know people will be interested in this. Tell us about there's a documentary coming out, right? About that you're involved with. It'll feature you. So can you tell us this? And I will send a link to everyone who's on this about the movie or information. So you look for an email from me, but go ahead